After a decade of tension between the British government and the American colonies, the Commander-in-Chief of the British forces in North America, Thomas Gage, was given the authority to use force to find and destroy military supplies. On April 18, 1775, General Gage ordered approximately 800 British troops to march to Concord to destroy weapons and ammunition he believed were hidden there. When the Patriots in Boston learned of these orders, they dispatched Paul Revere and William Dawes to ride to Concord, warning those they could along the way. By the early hours of April 19th, the local militia, under the command of Captain John Parker, had assembled on Lexington Green. At dawn, the British troops, under the command of Lieutenant John Pitcairn, marched into Lexington. Lieutenant Pitcairn ordered Parker and his men to drop their weapons and disperse. A shot rang out. From which side, no one truly knows, but once it did, both sides opened fire. This shot heard round the world was the beginning of open combat between the British and the Americans. The actions of General Gage and Lieutenant Pitcairn were not intended to start a war, but they did. The desire of tyrants to disarm their subjects did not start in the American colonies, but the fight against such usurpation is certainly part of our American DNA. Our right to keep and bear arms has been enshrined in the Second Amendment, along with our need for a militia, or as these members of Congress wish to call them, private paramilitary activity. Ever since 1934 and the passing of the National Firearms Act, Congress and the federal government as a whole has claimed the power to infringe on your right to keep and bear arms because they think they know best. Certain weapons were too dangerous for private use. Certain places were too dangerous for you to defend yourself. And now with the introduction of the Private Paramilitary Activity Act of 2024, Congress wants to tell you that certain groups are too dangerous to be armed. It shall be unlawful to knowingly, in a circumstance described in subsection B, while acting as part of or on behalf of a private paramilitary organization and armed with a firearm, explosive or incendiary device, or other dangerous weapon, to publicly patrol, drill, or engage in techniques capable of causing bodily injury or death, interfere with, interrupt, or attempt to interfere with or interrupt government operations or a government proceeding, interfere with or intimidate another person in that person's exercise of any right under the Constitution of the United States, assume the functions of a law enforcement officer, peace officer, or public official, whether or not acting under color of law, and thereby assert authority or purport to assert authority over another person without the consent of that person, or train to engage in any activity described in paragraphs 1 through 4. That's quite a laundry list of things Congress wants to prohibit. Let's start with how Congress wishes to define a private paramilitary organization. The term private paramilitary organization means any group of 3 or more persons associated under a command structure for the purpose of functioning in public or training to function in public as a combat support, law enforcement, or security services unit. Basically, Congress wants to outlaw militias, except for some we'll talk about later. A militia is defined as a part of the organized armed forces of a country liable to call only in emergency a body of citizens organized for military service. Militias are essential not only to our individual freedom, but the freedom of our states. As the Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Without a militia, our states would be defenseless against federal intrusion and overreach.